Euphoria has become one of the most talked about shows on the silver screen in a very long time. It's become HBO's second highest streamed show next to Game of Thrones, and just like Game of Thrones, the show is both beautiful and controversial in its own way. What sets it apart, however, I would argue, is that it's one of the most relatable Gen Z shows around from a mental health perspective. The characters may not always seem likable, but because of the issues they go through, you can at least see why, and that's where the appeal of the show comes from. Euphoria is only good if you care, and today in PsyPoints, I just want to explore that concept a little bit more deeply together. Before we get into the meat of analyzing empathy in Euphoria, let's briefly go over the most basic definitions of empathy and its key terms. Empathy has been defined in the Encyclopedia of Social Psychology as understanding another person's experience by imagining oneself in that other person's situation. One understands the other person's experience as if it were being experienced by the self, but without the self actually experiencing it. A distinction is maintained between self and others. So, sympathy, in contrast, involves the experience of being moved by or responding in tune with another person. But empathy is more of, well, understanding it. Understanding the feelings, understanding the emotions, via being able to put yourself in their shoes, even without having to experience the same thing that the other person has gone through. Technically, we can also distinguish between different types of empathy. Emotional empathy, in the simplest of terms, is generally being compassionate towards others, feeling the same emotions as another, and feeling distress towards another person's plight. Cognitive empathy, in contrast, has more to do with understanding another rather than feeling any sort of emotional response towards another. It's basically possessing the skill to more or less have complete and accurate knowledge of another person's mind, including how they feel, without feeling the same way. You can understand them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you feel the same way. Both forms of empathy are important, as, to be perfectly honest, most if not all of the characters in the show that we follow aren't really good people for a majority of the show, which may make it hard to watch for some people, but when you use empathy to understand why each character is how they are and how they ended up there, it's a lot easier, at least, to appreciate the show's portrayal of these broken people. If placed in a different show, these characters would be considered flat. But in Euphoria, each character that's focused on is given more depth as the show has progressed, making it easier to show emotional concern for them despite their immoral conduct. Rue is a drug addict, and her addiction makes it hard for her to maintain a healthy relationship with her childhood friend and family, for example, which would normally make her, well, an asshole. But understanding Rue's drug addiction is only possible if we realize how deeply her father's death affects her. And from there, rather than simply disapproving her, we can at the very least understand why she got to that point and feel bad for her. Sigmund Freud, who we all know by now is the founding father of daddy issues, introduced to us the idea that the quality of our parental relationships and the trauma we experience during our childhood directly determine, or at least heavily influence, who we become as we grow up. This concept is heavily used in Euphoria throughout the plot. We already know of Rue's father and his death's role in her addiction. But we also have Nate and how the trauma of finding his father's sex tapes when he was 11 really messed up his perception of love and sexuality. Let's not forget sisters Cassie and Lexi, whose father's abandonment affected them both in different ways. Cassie, because of this trauma, copes with her daddy issues by constantly seeking male validation and relationships to make up for the lack of love she experienced as a child. There are many more examples and so much more to look into for each character, but the point here is that the concept of being the product of your upbringing is very much in the center of each character's upbringing in the show. Euphoria also tackles the philosophical question of what it means to be a good person. It has so many morally gray characters who all make very bad decisions, like hooking up with your best friend's abusive ex-boyfriend. And this brings us back to empathy, because the show ignites in us a sort of moral dilemma Knowing that these characters are a product of their trauma, can we truly justify their actions, or are they still just bad people doing bad things? And in an effort to instill empathy in Euphoria's viewers, they utilize expressionism and their stylistic choices to bring each character's inner emotions outward onto the screen. This is done through lighting, costume design, and the camera angle and movement. One of the reasons Euphoria gets its critical acclaim is in its stylistic choices. It's no secret that Euphoria is a beautiful show to watch. The use of vibrant colors, style, and HBO budget behind it particularly make Euphoria stand out compared to your average show. And I'm confident if I didn't put Euphoria in the title, it would still be obvious we were talking about the show just from showing a symbol, clip, or image. Film normally makes the effort for us to understand the point of view to get the message it's trying to put across to the viewer, and frames scenes as if we were bystanders via a wide third-person viewpoint to make it seem as if we were there in the scene with the characters experiencing it all to make that task easier. Going back to expressionism, it's an artistic style where the artist attempts to express the subject's internal feelings in an external way. So, for example, dark, shadowy lighting in a scene with Rue can represent her dark emotions and struggles, and the bright, warmly lit scenes with Jules can represent the love Rue feels when she is with her. You can see traces of the character's mind in nearly every scene, and while this is done in Season 1, Season 2 is where they really go deep in this creative choice, utilizing not just expressive lighting and camera work, but symbolism and large action and dream sequences. Constant attention and heavy emotion is placed upon all of these characters from not just a plot and cinematic standpoint, but it's also complemented from a setting-based one as well. During this time in our lives as teenagers, our frontal cortex is still developing, so our emotions are felt to greater degrees. Everything matters and feels like a constant state of highs and lows, and it's a part of why the high school setting is so perfect for the show. We're still developing at this point in our lives and finding out who we are, what matters to us, what's right versus wrong, and each dramatic event in our lives feels all the more impactful to our growth. Although not everyone may have had the same experiences as the characters in the show via partying and other extreme sexual and violent ways, we can still understand how they got to that point. But to be fair, criticisms still have been thrown against Euphoria, and I want to discuss those fairly as well. From its themes in drugs, sex, and violence, not to mention its graphic content, Euphoria is a walking red flag and ready to explode with loads of controversy, as it already has. It didn't help that Euphoria was set in high school either, thus leading some viewers to feel uncomfortable, especially for parents. It would be a different story if they were a bunch of college students who are going through these incidents, or those who are in adult age, but since they're underage, the watching experience and atmosphere may be different for the viewers. Another factor which could have caused controversies to stir from the show is how these scenes seemingly appear to glorify drug abuse, addiction, and any other self-destructive vice shown in the show. This has been noticed by critics such as the Drug Abuse Resistance Education, or DARE, who stated that the show chooses to misguidedly glorify and erroneously depict high school student drug use, addiction, anonymous sex, violence, and other destructive behaviors as common and widespread in today's world. Euphoria already took a great risk by utilizing drugs in its plot. Regardless, this should be taken as a somewhat admirable way to represent those who may be struggling with these types of vices or partaking in them. To them, it's an escape and feels good at the time, and you can't talk about these topics in any significant or meaningful way if you can't display how they feel doing these controversial acts before their downfall, which a lot of the characters do end up having there are consequences for all of their actions throughout the show, and that needs to be acknowledged. Euphoria fairly represents these realities, albeit highly stylistically. It also brings to light how we can communicate and respond to similar people in our lives with these struggles. Of course, it's better to watch the show with an open mind and preferably with guidance from someone of a more mature standing. So yes, don't watch things that are illegal for your age, kids. In a world that's dominated by social media and shaped by artistic works such as film, it's very easy to romanticize and avoid real-life issues while forgetting the trauma that people normally face on a day-to-day basis. But Euphoria takes an interesting approach where everything's highly stylized but not romanticized. It's raw and you feel every painful emotion that the characters go through as they face these traumatic events. It's intensely emotional, and once you set aside your own bias to empathize with a character, it hooks you into the show and the world of it all, and it's a really beautiful thing about the show. If you give it a chance, it makes you care. But what do you guys think? Do you think that the show is really good at making you care, or do you hate every one of these characters? Do you think it's a good way of portraying all of these social issues, or do you think that putting them in high school was just really, really weird and really off-putting? Please comment any of your thoughts and any topic you want for us to tackle in the future down below in the comments. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and thank you all for watching. I hope you all have a great day ahead.